Growing up, I always knew I was the second choice. My name is Emma, and from my earliest memories, I watched my parents shower my older brother, Michael, with endless attention and opportunities while I stood in the shadows. The difference in how they treated us wasn't subtle. It was as clear as day. I remember sitting alone at the kitchen table, struggling through my homework while Mom and Dad eagerly drove Michael to his latest singing competition or club meeting. He was 3 years older than me, and somehow, that made him more deserving of everything. Every time his teachers mentioned even the slightest talent, my parents jumped at the chance to nurture it, spending money we didn't really have on lessons and equipment. "Michael has such a beautiful voice," Mom would gush to anyone who would listen. "He's going to be something special one day." Meanwhile, I learned early on not to ask for much. When I showed interest in art classes, Mom simply smiled apologetically. "Maybe next semester, honey. Michael's voice lessons are taking up the budget right now." The disparity became even more apparent during Michael's senior year of high school. I was 15 at the time, sitting quietly at the dinner table when my parents made their big announcement. "We've been saving up," Dad said proudly, "and we're going to send Michael to Preston College. It's one of the most prestigious schools in the state." Michael's eyes lit up. "Really? That's amazing." "And that's not all," Mom added, beaming. "You can stay in our apartment near the campus. No rent, of course. We want you to focus on your studies." I pushed my peas around my plate, trying to swallow my disappointment. Not that anyone was looking at me anyway. All eyes were on Michael as he excitedly talked about his future. That night, lying in bed, I did the math. If they were spending this much on Michael's education and giving him a free apartment, there was no way they'd have anything left for my college fund. The realization hit me hard. But instead of crying, I started planning. The next day, I visited my grandparents' antique store. My grandfather listened carefully as I explained my situation. "Well, Emma," he said, studying me thoughtfully, "I could just give you the money for college." He paused, stroking his chin. "But I think it would be better if you earned it yourself. How would you like to work here after school?" And just like that, my journey began. While Michael packed up for his prestigious college adventure, I started working at the antique store every afternoon. I helped catalog items, assisted customers, and learned the business from my grandfather. My grandmother would bring me snacks and share stories about the vintage pieces we sold. My parents' reaction to my initiative was telling. When I told them about my job and my plan to save for college, they seemed relieved, almost grateful, that I had solved my own problem. 3 years passed in a blur. Every afternoon spent dusting old furniture and organizing vintage jewelry had paid off. By the time I graduated high school, I had saved enough for college. There wasn't much fanfare, just a quiet dinner at home, but I didn't mind. I was proud of what I had accomplished on my own. I enrolled in the local state college, choosing a practical business program that wouldn't drain my savings. The tuition was reasonable, and I even had some money left over. Living at home and taking the bus to campus wasn't glamorous, but it made financial sense. One evening, I finally brought up something that had been on my mind for a while. "Mom, Dad," I started hesitantly. "I've been thinking about getting a used car. It would make getting to classes a lot easier." Dad barely looked up from his phone. "Sorry, Emma, we just don't have the money for that right now." Mom chimed in. "The bus system is perfectly fine. Lots of students use it." I bit my tongue, swallowing the frustration that had been building for years. After everything, I wasn't even surprised anymore. And even contributed to his first car, but that was ancient history now. My first year of college passed quickly, and just as I was finishing my spring finals, our house erupted with excitement. Michael was graduating from Preston College. Mom and Dad threw him an elaborate celebration, inviting what felt like half the town. Our house was packed with relatives, friends, and neighbors, all there to celebrate my brother's achievement. I was in the kitchen, carefully arranging appetizers, when Michael made his grand entrance. A pretty blonde woman on his arm. Sarah, his college girlfriend. They were beaming as they walked into the room, hand in hand. "Everyone," Michael announced, commanding immediate attention. "Sarah and I have some exciting news. We're engaged." The room exploded with cheers and congratulations. Mom burst into tears of joy, clutching her hands to her chest, while Dad clapped Michael on the back so hard I thought he might fall over. "But wait, there's more," Sarah added, her voice sweet as honey. "After the wedding, we'll be moving to Connecticut. My parents own a successful business there, and they want us to take it over." Mom's joyful tears turned into full-on sobbing. "My baby boy! A successful businessman! That's my son!" Dad proclaimed proudly, his chest puffed out with pride. "I always knew you were destined for great things." I stood in the corner, watching the scene unfold. Nobody seemed to notice that I had just finished my freshman year with a 4 GPA, or that I'd been working part-time at a local cafe while maintaining my studies. But I was used to it by now. The wedding preparations consumed the next year while I focused on my studies, now in my 3rd year. Mom and Dad threw themselves into planning the perfect wedding for their perfect son. They took out a substantial loan to cover everything: the venue, the catering, the flowers, the band. Nothing was too good for Michael and Sarah. The wedding itself was exactly what you'd expect: extravagant, emotional, and all about Michael. I stood in my bridesmaid dress, which I had to pay for myself, watching my parents beam with pride as they danced with the happy couple. They had spared no expense, even though I knew they'd be paying off the loan for years to come. After Michael and Sarah left for Connecticut, I stood in my cramped bedroom at my parents' house, staring at my textbooks. An idea struck me. The apartment where Michael had lived during college was now empty. It was perfectly located near campus, and it would give me some much-needed independence. That evening, I approached my parents while they were watching TV. Dad, since Michael's apartment is empty now, would it be okay if I moved in there?" They exchanged glances before Mom spoke. "Well, honey, you can move in, but you'll need to pay rent." The words hit me like a slap in the face. Rent? But Michael lived there for free. Dad shifted uncomfortably in his recliner. "That was different. We have the wedding loan to pay off now. We need the extra income." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "I'm your daughter too," I said, my voice trembling slightly. "I've never asked you for anything. I worked for my college money. I take the bus everywhere. Mom held up her hand to stop me. She and Dad had one of their silent conversations, the kind they used to have when deciding whether to spend money on another of Michael's activities. "Fine," Mom finally said. "We'll charge you half the normal rent." I wanted to argue more, but I knew this was the best offer I'd get. "Okay, I'll take it." That weekend, I moved into the apartment. It still had traces of Michael everywhere. Holes in the walls from his college posters, water rings on the coffee table from his late-night study sessions. I took extra shifts at the cafe to cover the rent, often working until closing time. Between classes, studying, and work, I barely had time to sleep. My final year of college passed in a blur of textbooks, coffee shop aprons, and exhaustion. Every day felt like a cycle of endless responsibility. But I pushed through, knowing that I was doing it all on my own. Unlike Michael, there was no safety net waiting for me, no grand celebration to mark my milestones. But I had something else: determination, resilience, and the unwavering belief that one day, my hard work would pay off. Midnight study sessions blurred into each other, and before I knew it, graduation day had arrived. While my classmates' families planned extravagant parties and grand celebrations, my parents opted for a quiet dinner at home. No big venue, no extended family, no friends, just my grandparents and a simple meal at our dining table. There was no elaborate catering like there had been for Michael's graduation. Instead, we ate the lasagna I had made myself. As we sat around the table, Grandma reached across and gently squeezed my hand. "Emma dear, we're so proud of you," she said warmly. "Graduating with highest honors while working part-time. That's quite an achievement." Before I could respond, Mom's phone buzzed. Her face instantly lit up as she read the message. "Oh, speaking of achievements," she interrupted, her voice brimming with excitement. "Michael just texted. The business is doing wonderfully. He says they're expanding into 2 new locations." I watched as my graduation dinner turned into yet another celebration of Michael's success in Connecticut. My grandparents exchanged knowing looks, and Grandpa gave my shoulder a supportive squeeze. I forced a small smile, swallowing the frustration building inside me. Despite everything, my hard work in college paid off sooner than expected. Within 2 weeks of graduation, I landed a position at Anderson & Mitchell, one of the most prestigious firms in the city. The starting salary was better than I had dared to hope for, and I was thrilled to finally be starting my career. That excitement, however, lasted exactly 3 days. Until my parents found out about my salary. "Emma," Mom said during one of her unexpected visits to my apartment, "now that you're making good money, you should start paying the full rent amount." I stared at her, wondering if I had heard correctly. "But we agreed on half. That was when you were a student," she replied matter-of-factly. "You can afford it now." I wanted to point out that Michael had lived here for free, even after getting a job. But I had long since learned that comparing myself to my brother was pointless. The apartment's location was perfect, just a 10-minute walk from my office, so I reluctantly agreed. Life soon fell into a routine. I threw myself into my work, determined to prove my worth at the company. Every month, like clockwork, Mom would call. "Emma dear, just reminding you about the rent. It's due on Friday. We're counting on that money." 3 years passed this way. I earned a significant promotion and a raise, but I kept that information to myself. I had learned my lesson. Any hint of financial success would only lead to more demands from my parents. Through their occasional updates, I heard that Michael and Sarah had a baby boy. I saw pictures on social media but hadn't visited. Our communication had dwindled to perfunctory birthday messages and holiday greetings. And honestly, I was fine with that. Then came the phone call that changed everything. "Emma?" Mom's voice was tight with tension. "We need to talk about your brother." I sighed, already bracing myself for whatever was coming next. "What about him?" "There's been some trouble," she admitted. "The business, well, it's gone bankrupt. He had a terrible falling out with Sarah's parents. They're furious about how he managed things, and now they're not speaking to him anymore." I closed my eyes. I already knew where this was heading. "He's coming back home," she continued, her voice softening slightly. "With Sarah and the baby." I took a slow breath. "Oh," I said carefully. "I assume he'll be staying with you and Dad?" There was a pause. "Actually," Mom hesitated, "that apartment you're in, it's quite large. He'll be staying there." The phone nearly slipped from my hand. "What?" "Mom, this is my home. I've been living here for years." "Don't be dramatic, Emma," she sighed. "Your brother needs help. He doesn't have any money right now, so he'll stay there for free. You can keep paying the rent." "That's absurd," I protested. "If he's moving in, maybe I should just find my own place." "Don't you dare," Mom's voice turned sharp, almost commanding. "We need your rent money now more than ever. Michael's going through a rough time. You wouldn't want to make things harder for him, would you?" I shook my head in disbelief, feeling the same familiar sting of injustice settle deep in my chest. Without another word, I hung up. Moving day was worse than I had imagined. Michael, Sarah, and the baby arrived, filling the apartment with boxes, baby supplies, and an overwhelming presence that made my once peaceful home feel suffocating. I stood by, watching in silence as they took over, knowing full well that my feelings, as always, didn't matter. Their crying baby, Tommy, showed up with a mountain of luggage and baby equipment, and Mom arrived soon after to supervise the transition, which apparently meant making my life as uncomfortable as possible. "Emma, clear out your room," Mom directed, hands on her hips. "Michael and Sarah need it for Tommy's nursery." I stood frozen in the doorway of my bedroom, my personal space, for the past 4 years. "What? Where am I supposed to sleep?" "The living room has a perfectly good couch," she replied, already beginning to move my things. "You can't be serious," I protested. "I pay rent here, full rent, and you're putting me on the couch?" Mom's expression hardened. "Don't be selfish, Emma. Your brother has a baby. Babies need proper rooms." I watched helplessly as my bedroom was transformed into a nursery, complete with a crib, a changing table, and an overwhelming amount of baby paraphernalia. My belongings were unceremoniously piled into a corner of the living room, which was now, apparently, my bedroom. The next few weeks were a nightmare. Michael moped around the apartment all day. alternating between complaining about his in-laws and reminiscing about his glory days as a successful businessman. Sarah spent her time either crying or arguing with Michael about whose turn it was to change Tommy's diaper. The baby, sensing the constant tension, cried incessantly. I would come home from a long day at work to find dishes piled in the sink, toys scattered everywhere, and dirty laundry spilling out of the hamper. At first, I tried to ignore the mess, but the dirty dishes quickly attracted ants, and the clutter made it impossible to relax in what was now my so-called bedroom. So, I cleaned, I cooked, I did laundry, and yet, every meal I prepared mysteriously disappeared before I could even take a bite. One evening, after a particularly exhausting day at work, I decided to extend an olive branch. "Michael," I said, keeping my voice as neutral as possible, "we actually have some openings at my company. I could put in a good word for you with HR. The benefits are great and the starting salary is decent." Michael looked up from his phone, his face twisting with indignation. "An entry-level position? Are you kidding me? I'm a businessman, Emma. I don't do entry-level. I need an executive position, something worthy of my experience." "Your experience running a business into the ground?" The words slipped out before I could stop them. Michael's face darkened. "You don't know anything about what happened. That was my in-laws' fault. They set me up to fail." He stormed off to his room. My old room. Leaving me standing there, wondering how much longer I could live like this. 3 months into our forced cohabitation, I sat at the kitchen table, now covered in Tommy's dried baby food and Sarah's coffee rings, reviewing my bank statements. The numbers didn't lie. My expenses had nearly doubled since Michael and his family moved in. That was the final push I needed. I picked up my phone and called my parents, rehearsing what I would say. I was determined to stay calm and rational. "Mom, Dad, we need to talk about the living situation," I began. "Michael and Sarah aren't contributing anything to the household expenses. They're eating all my food, using the utilities I pay for." "Emma?" Mom cut me off, her voice sharp. "I can't believe how selfish you're being. Your brother lost everything. His in-laws betrayed him. He has a baby to take care of." Dad's voice joined in from the background. "You should be grateful you're in a position to help family." "But that's just it," I pressed on. "I'm not just helping. I'm carrying the entire financial burden. They don't buy groceries, they don't pay for anything." "Enough," Mom snapped. "Your brother is going through a difficult time. This isn't forever. You need to be more understanding." That night, I opened my laptop and started searching for apartments. I bookmarked several promising options, all within walking distance of my office, just in case, I told myself. Just in case things got worse. Things got worse exactly 2 weeks later. I was sitting on my couch bed, trying to focus on work documents while Tommy wailed in the background, and Michael and Sarah had their 4th argument of the day. The doorbell rang, and my parents walked in without waiting for anyone to answer. Mom had that look on her face, the one she used to get right before announcing that Michael had been enrolled in another expensive program. Dad stood behind her, avoiding eye contact. "Emma," Mom announced, "we need to discuss the rent." I looked up from my laptop, already dreading what was coming next. "I paid this month's rent on time, as always." "Yes, but starting next month, we're doubling it." The room fell silent. Even Tommy stopped crying. I stared at my mother, certain I had misheard. "Double? But I'm already paying the full market rate." Mom gestured around the apartment. "Well, now there are more people living here, more wear and tear on the property, more utilities being used. It's only fair that the rent reflects that." "Fair?" I let out a hollow laugh. "How is this fair? I'm the only one paying anything." "Fair? How is it fair that I should pay double rent while being forced to sleep on a couch in my own living room? If anyone should be paying more, it should be Michael. He was the one not paying anything at all." Michael jumped up from his chair, his expression twisting with outrage. "This is ridiculous. I lost everything, and now you want me to pay rent?" "Of course not, sweetie," Mom soothed, patting his arm before turning back to me, her expression hardening. "Emma, you have a good job. You can afford this. Your brother needs time to get back on his feet." I looked at each of their faces. Mom's stern expectation, Dad's awkward avoidance, Michael's entitled indignation, and Sarah's barely contained smug satisfaction. 3 months of pent-up frustration threatened to explode, but I swallowed it down. Instead, I simply nodded. "Fine," I said quietly. "Double rent, starting next month." Mom's face broke into a satisfied smile, and she and Dad left shortly after, clearly pleased with how smoothly their announcement had gone. They had no idea they had just given me the final push I needed to make my decision. Later that evening, while trying to focus on a book from my uncomfortable couch bed, I overheard Michael and Sarah whispering in the kitchen. Their excitement made them careless. "Can you believe it?" Sarah giggled. "Your mom just told me they're going to give us half of Emma's rent money every month." Michael's smug reply made my blood boil. "Of course they are. They understand we need help right now. Emma makes plenty of money. She can support us for a while." "This is perfect," Sarah continued. "We get to live here for free, and we'll even have spending money. Your sister doesn't need to know." I lay there gripping my book so hard my knuckles turned white. All this time, I had thought my parents were just being unfair. But this was something else entirely. This was a calculated scheme. They weren't just enabling Michael. They were actively planning to use me to fund his laziness. Enough. I grabbed my laptop and pulled up the apartment listings I had bookmarked. One caught my eye. A modern one-bedroom in a quiet building, actually closer to my office than this apartment. The rent was exactly what I had been paying before the proposed increase. I called the number immediately, trying to keep my voice down. "Hi, I'm interested in the apartment on Cedar Street." "Yes, I could come see it right now if that's possible." "Perfect. I'll be there in 15 minutes. The apartment was everything I hoped for. Clean, quiet, and most importantly, Michael-free. I signed the lease on the spot and paid the security deposit with my emergency savings. Back at the apartment, I waited until everyone was asleep before quietly packing my essential belongings into 2 large suitcases. I left my furniture. It wasn't worth the hassle, and I could buy new pieces that didn't have memories of this mess attached to them. The next morning, I wheeled my suitcases to the door while Michael sat at the kitchen table, scrolling through job listings he had no intention of applying to. "Going somewhere?" he asked, barely looking up. "Month-long business trip," I lied smoothly. "Big project in our Cincinnati office." He just grunted, already uninterested. I moved into my new apartment that evening, ordering takeout and sitting on the floor of my empty living room. The silence was beautiful. No crying baby, no arguing couple, no guilt. For the first time in months, I felt truly at peace. For the next month, I lived quietly in my new home. I bought a comfortable bed, a cozy couch that wasn't a makeshift bed, and kitchen supplies that only I would use. I cooked meals that stayed in my refrigerator until I ate them. I slept through the night without being awakened by Tommy's crying. My home was my sanctuary, a place where I could finally breathe. Then, right on schedule, my phone rang. My mother's name flashed across the screen. I already knew what this was about, but I answered anyway, curious to see how she would spin things this time. "Emma," she snapped, skipping any pleasantries. "Why haven't you sent the full rent payment? We agreed on double, remember?" I couldn't help but laugh, a genuine, amused laugh that seemed to throw her off. "Actually, Mom, I know all about your little arrangement with Michael and Sarah. Were you planning to tell me that half of my rent money was going straight into their pockets?" "It's none of your business. Your brother needs—" "No, Mom," I interrupted, still chuckling. "What my brother needs is to grow up and take responsibility for once in his life. I've moved out. I found my own place. The apartment is all yours and Michael's now." There was a beat of silence, then an ear-piercing screech. "You what? You can't do this! We need that rent money!" "Well," I said casually, stretching out on my new couch, the one I had picked out for myself in my own apartment, where no one could kick me out of my bedroom. "I'm sure Michael will step up and start paying rent now that he's had time to get back on his feet. I can't wait to see how that works out for you." Another pause. This time, I could almost hear the gears turning in my mother's head as reality set in. Their reliable source of income was gone, and all they had left was their unemployed, entitled son who had never paid a bill in his life. Then her voice changed. Suddenly it was soft, sweet, the way it used to be when she wanted something from me. "Emma, sweetie," she cooed, "let's not be hasty. We can work something out. What if we go back to the original rent amount? That was fair, wasn't it?" I settled deeper into my couch, savoring the moment. No, Mom, that's not going to happen. But, Emma, we're family, you can't just... Family? I cut her off, my voice steady but firm. Is that what you call it when you scheme behind my back to funnel my money to Michael? When you kick me out of my own bedroom while I'm paying all the bills? When you've spent my entire life treating me like an ATM while treating Michael like royalty? That's not fair. We've always... Goodbye, Mom. I ended the call and blocked her number, then did the same for my father, Michael, and Sarah. It was over. That was 6 months ago. My grandparents still keep me updated on the situation, even though I never ask, they just know I need to hear it. To remind myself that I made the right choice. According to them, Michael, Sarah, and Tommy are still living in the apartment. They haven't paid a single month's rent. Mom and Dad are covering all the utilities, plus giving them spending money. Because, of course, the baby needs things. My brother still hasn't found a job. Apparently, there just aren't enough executive positions available for failed businessmen with a track record of bankruptcy. Meanwhile, my new life is peaceful. I got another promotion at work, bought myself a car, and started taking evening classes for my MBA. My apartment is always clean, my food stays in my fridge until I want to eat it, and every night I sleep in my own bed, uninterrupted and at peace. The other day, I ran into Sarah's cousin at the grocery store. She told me they're expecting another baby. I just smiled and wished them well, knowing that somewhere across town, my parents are probably already figuring out how to pay for another nursery. But that's not my problem anymore. For the first time in my life, I'm putting myself first, and it feels absolutely right. Looking back on everything, I realize the most valuable lesson I've learned: you have to put yourself first. For so long, I let myself be treated as an afterthought, as if my needs, my dreams, and my hard work were insignificant compared to Michael's. But in the end, I discovered that I am responsible for my own happiness. To anyone who has ever felt like the second choice, like their sacrifices are expected but never appreciated, hear me when I say this. You are not selfish for wanting to be valued. You are not ungrateful for expecting fairness, and most importantly, you are not wrong for walking away from people who only take from you without giving anything in return. My story isn't just about family favoritism. It's about reclaiming my worth. It's about setting boundaries, standing up for myself, and refusing to let guilt dictate my decisions. I spent years waiting for my parents to see me, to acknowledge my efforts, to finally appreciate me. But I've learned that I don't need their validation. I only need my own. If you find yourself constantly bending to accommodate others, if you feel like you are carrying a weight that isn't yours to bear, take a step back and ask yourself, is this making me happy? Am I being respected? Am I being valued? If the answer is no, then maybe it's time to choose yourself. Walking away was the hardest thing I've ever done, but it was also the best decision I ever made. Now I have peace, I have stability, I have control over my own life. And I promise you, there is nothing more freeing than realizing that you deserve better and finally taking the steps to claim it. So, to whoever is listening, choose yourself. Choose your happiness, choose your freedom. Because at the end of the day, you are the only one who can truly fight for the life you deserve.